Welcome. Thank you to the Apprenticeship Employment Network for hosting the National Skills Week Industry Workshop. Never before has skills reform been more critical to our nation. Ensuring our workforce has the skills we need for the jobs of the future is critical for rebuilding our economy, especially in the post-COVID environment. Collaboration between government, industry and the community will be vital to the success of our recovery. And it goes without saying that the Morrison government is committed to supporting Australians to stay and work. However, we also need Australians better trained for the jobs needed. And to do that, we need real reform when it comes to skills training in Australia. So we have prioritised skills development as part of the JobMaker strategy, which is designed to set Australia up for the economic success over the next 3 to 5 years. Our multi-billion skills package provides a significant boost to the vet sector. This includes our supporting apprentices and trainees wage subsidy that is providing timely, targeted and scalable support to businesses to keep on their existing apprentices and trainees. This builds on the establishment of the National Careers Institute and the National Skills Commission. These two organisations are working together to strengthen, streamline and improve the delivery of and access to careers information in Australia. Again, I'd like to thank the Apprenticeship Employment Network for hosting this industry workshop, and I hope that you enjoyed today's session. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. And thank you, Gary and Dean, for inviting me today to provide an update on the work the department's doing to take forward the skills and training agenda, particularly in National Skills Week. So, I find National Skills Week a really important focal point for the promotion of Australia's vocational education and training system. And I believe it's now in its 10th year. And again this week, including through help through organisations like AEN and the GAN, we hope to focus apprenticeships and traineeships as part of this week to the wider public and particularly to employers. I've been told there's a broad range of stakeholders registered for the presentations this week, and the majority of stakeholders probably from the group training sector and mostly from Victoria. So some of my slides you will see are tailored towards Victoria and to group training. Given the broad range of participants, I thought I'd sort of focus on three themes. The first one, giving you an update on progress on how we're implementing the skills reforms that have already been announced, many of those last year. Then around the COVID measures and in particular supporting apprentices and trainees, and then a bit of an overview of the future directions that we're taking. I have got a lot of slides and we'll see how we go within the hour. And if we don't have time for questions, as Gary said, happy for people to email questions through to Gary or directly to me for that matter. Look, this first slide is a little bit about the restructure in our department that we've recently made. So it better reflects our not just current work, but moving towards the future skills reforms. So you can see from here that we have 3 core divisions in the department. They're on the left-hand side, which have a mix of reform policy work and implementation, as well as 2 new task forces and a couple of new bodies. So our Quality and Policy Division is undertaking the work on the qualification reforms, industry engagement and vet regulatory reform. So that's the area in the department that oversees our part of ASQA. The VSL Vet Compliance and TRA Division includes management of the Vet Student Loans Program and Trade Recognition Australia, but it's also the division that independently does our compliance work on programs that are delivered across the whole group, and that includes all our apprenticeship programs. The Apprenticeships and Workforce Skills Division is dedicated to apprenticeships and foundation skills and program management. And you can see that this is the division that my team sits in, which we've coloured in blue. But it also includes the Economic Task Force. It's looking after the COVID-19 supporting apprentices and trainees economic package. There's 3 senior officers in our division, and we work as a coordinated team on Australian apprenticeships. Then we have our 2 new bodies, the National Skills Commission, formally launched on the 1st of July 2020 and led by the Interim Skills Commissioner, Mr. Adam Boynton, and the National Careers Institute, established in the department on 1 July 2019 to strengthen and modernise the skills and careers sectors. You'll see on the right-hand side, we've formed a new skills reform task force. That task force is working on the big picture future directions and in particular working very closely with state and territory governments. And the Unique Student Identifiers Office, an important enabler in the sector and located in Adelaide. The department also has dedicated skills and training staff located in each of our state offices around Australia. And it's often these staff who are our first contacts for local stakeholders, including GTOs. In terms of my specific role, the Workforce and Apprenticeships Industry Branch, as the name suggests, looks after apprenticeship policy and programs where the focus is on industry and employers. This includes being the GTO stakeholder manager, and in terms of my formal responsibilities around that, that means that my team's responsible for publishing and maintaining the information provided by state and territory training authorities on the Group Training National Register. At the moment, there's around 182 GTOs on the register, noting that it's listed by state of operation, so some GTOs are on there more than once. Because of this role, it means that I am the senior officer who provides advice to government on group training matters, and for that reason I have a close relationship with the Victorian Group Training Association and also the National Association, and I'm receiving weekly updates from them on how GTOs are faring through the COVID-19 pandemic and passing that on to government. Probably the most well-known policies and programs that I manage are the Australian Apprenticeships Incentives Program, some of the Commonwealth-State programs like the Skilling Australia's Fund, Energising Tasmania and Revitalising TAFE campuses across Australia. And I'm also responsible for the establishment of the 10 industry training hubs. While much of the focus has been on COVID-19 support over the last few months, the government and department is still progressing a range of reforms that were announced in 2019. You'll recall the Honourable Stephen Joyce conducted a review of the Australian vet sector, which included comprehensive consultations with stakeholders, and delivered his report, The Expert Review of Australia's Vet System, in early 2019. In response to the review, there was $585.3 million of initiatives announced in the budget as a skills package for delivering skills for today and tomorrow. While there have been some minor changes to implementation as a result of COVID-19, this work has progressed significantly in the last year. The policy and implementation of the package is underpinned by a vet expert panel headed by Stephen Joyce, appointed to provide critical independent advice on the implementation and future of vet reform, and also a vet stakeholder advisory group consisting of key players in the vet system. The National Apprentice Employment Network is represented on this group, and they provide a focus on, from a group training perspective, to policy and program matters being taken forward. The creation of the National Skills Commission was one of the key recommendations from the Expert Review of VET. The government formally launched the NSC, and we've got lots of new acronyms with all these new bodies, something that all of us in VET are used to, on the 1st of July 2020 to provide detailed labour market analysis, including an annual report setting out the skills needs of Australia. and the legislation from the National Skills Commission is currently in Parliament. To inform the establishment of the NSC, some of you may have been involved in the department's consultations, which covered the NSC, skills organisations and National Careers Institute. 536 people from 398 organisations, which included group training organisations, attended workshops held in every capital city and in 5 regional locations, Bendigo, Cairns, Orange, Karratha and Mount Isa, between about October and November last year. It seems like a long time ago now, but it's actually within the last 12 months. The workshops were complemented by 35 individual consultations with senior skills experts, including senior vet officials from states and territories. There was also a number of roundtable events and 60 submissions were received to a discussion paper. The National Skills Commission is being established to oversee the government's investment in VET. As the economy recovers and businesses start hiring again, we need to make sure that they can find people with the right skills. We don't want a mismatch between what business want and the skills people have being a handbrake on recovery. The NSC's main aim is to develop robust intelligence on Australia's labour market, our workforce and current and emerging skills needs. The NSC will publish close to real-time data on labour markets to identify emerging skill shortages and other labour market trends. Shortages are going to be identified through a combination of available labour market data, stakeholder consultation and employer surveys. Strengthened labour market analysis will provide long-term benefits for employers, students and workers by helping to ensure that the training system is responsive to skills needs. The labour market has experienced major disruption, and while signs of recovery are emerging, uncertainty remains around when demand will pick up and what jobs will be most in demand. Matching workers to jobs in this changing environment will require the ability to quickly identify skills needs and retrain people for jobs that are in demand. I think more than ever, the focus on skilling and reskilling displaced workers will be essential to the recovery of the jobs market and our economy. I know that key stakeholders have been identified for the purposes of consulting on occupations in shortage and surplus, and the NSC, I understand, will be commencing its stakeholder consultations in the coming months. The NSC recently released its first publication, a photo of that up on the screen, a snapshot of the Australian labour market and COVID-19. The report provides an overview of the current state of the labour market in relation to COVID-19, making it clear the scale of economic challenge, making it clear what the scale of economic challenge is facing workers and businesses. Over the rest of 2020, the NSC will look to release reports that outline the likely skill needs of the economy as we continue to recover from COVID-19. The NSC's continuing analysis will underpin much of the work being taken forward on VET reform and the recovery. They will use both traditional and new data sources and techniques, including big data and machine learning approaches, as well as more traditional economic and skills analysis. New machine learning techniques, such as those used by the JEDI, the Jobs and Education Data Infrastructure Project, make this sort of analysis possible. These techniques can also identify additional training needed to open up new employment options for people seeking new jobs and to identify pathways to new employment opportunities that take advantage of a job seeker's existing skills. JEDI also provides a single comprehensive source of up-to-date information, enabling the NSC to provide relevant, timely and accessible information to better understand the needs of a changing economy. I won't talk too long around the National Careers Institute because I'm aware my colleague Tiffany Blight is doing a presentation on the NCI. The NCI was established on the 1st of July last year within the department, and it's a key part of the government's commitment to strengthening and modernising the skills and careers sectors. The NCI will provide up-to-date evidence-based career information to help Australians make effective decisions about learning, training and employment pathways. They'll also be promoting career opportunities that a VET pathway leads to. Current activities of the NCI include guiding the work of the National Careers Ambassador, ongoing delivery of VET information strategy partnerships and activities, and the delivery of a digital platform later this year. The digital platform will be powered by data from the National Skills Commission and will allow people to identify career options that meet their interests, skills and experience, linking them through to appropriate skills, education and employment pathways. The NCI is also playing an important role in COVID-19 recovery, linking people at all ages and stages of their career to education, training or employment that best suits their needs. Many of the other initiatives being implemented following the expert panel review are in the Australian Apprenticeships and Foundation Skills area. And these are the initiatives that have been taken forward in the division that I work in. A key component of the VET sector is Australian apprenticeships. And many of you will know that I have worked in Australian apprenticeships for much of my 30-year career. So for context, the team pulled out some of the NCVR data. This is public data at the 31st of December 2019, with a focus on Victoria and in particular GTOs. So this slide shows the in-training apprentices and trainees on the 31st of December for each of the last 5 years to December 2019, nationally and for Victoria. And as you can see, Victoria accounts for around 22 to 23% of the national in-training apprentices and trainees in each of those last 5 years. This slide breaks down the Victorian data by GTO. So it shows the group training numbers in Victoria have remained relatively steady between around 4,400 and 4,700 over this same 5-year period. At 31 December 2019, the NCVR data shows that around 7.4% of apprentices and trainees in Victoria were employed through a GTO. Of the 4,400 GTO employed Australian apprentices, 69% were training in trade occupations and 79% of those training in both trade and non-trade were male. The gender breakup is probably not a surprise when you have a look at the occupations that they're training in, with almost 30% of those in training with a GTO in Victoria in automotive and engineering trades, 17% in construction trades, and 17% in electrotechnology and telecommunications trades. As I indicated, I am the National Program Manager and the Delegate for the Australian Apprenticeships Incentives Program. You'll be aware that legislation and therefore authority to approve an individual to train with an employer and receive training from an RTO under a contract of training sits with states and territories rather than the Commonwealth. While there have been changes to incentives eligibility over the last 20 years, the current construct of the program commenced on 1 January 1998 with the cessation of the old craft scheme, the Commonwealth rebate for apprentices in full-time training. I'm just trying to remember back because I was here in 1998 when that happened, and the merging of apprenticeships and traineeship employer incentives into a single program. The program includes a range of standard incentives available at commencement and completion of an Australian apprenticeship, as well as payments targeted at addressing specific skill shortages, priority occupations, and to support employers and Australian apprentices in rural and regional Australia. 2 new incentives were added to the program in 2019, the Australian Apprentice Wage Subsidy Trial and the Additional Identified Skill Shortage Payment. The program is demand driven, which means that every eligible application and claim that comes in from an employer or apprentice will be funded under the program. There is no budget cap, but of course we have to anticipate how much the budget will be every year, and that's published in the portfolio budget statement. More than 60,000 individual employers claim incentives every year under the program, and that has been relatively steady over the last few years. In 2020, the new Supporting Apprentices and Trainees measure was added into this program, and it's therefore underpinned by the core eligibility criteria and payment mechanisms that already exist in this program. The expert review of the VET system heard that employers found the incentives program difficult to navigate and called for changes to make the program more streamlined. Participants will recall that the department was working towards a goal of the new streamlined program starting from 1 July 2020. The idea was to reduce the number of payments from around 30 to 14, and it would be supported by a new National Skills Priority List for Australian apprentices. A lot of consultation has been done with 2 consultation papers and lots of feedback from industry, which is still up on the department's website. With the economic conditions changing rapidly and the full impact of COVID-19 on skills needs unknown at this time, the government has chosen to delay the implementation of the IIA. And therefore the consultations on the National Skills Priority List for Australian apprentices. Apologies for my phone ringing. I can assure participants who have been consulted or put in submissions for those reviews that your input is not lost. We've just paused it for the moment through COVID and delayed the implementation of the new program. The additional identified skill shortage payment is available to eligible apprentices commencing from 1 July 2019 and their employers in 10 occupations experiencing national skill shortage. Eligible employers receive $4,000 in 2 payments and apprentices receive $2,000 across 2 payments over the life of the apprenticeship. The number of apprentices signed up in an ACE payment occupation and the number of apprentices registered as additional to an employer's usual intake has increased progressively since 1 July 2019, including through the COVID-19 months. At the 20th of August, 22,318 apprentices had been signed up in those 10 occupations. So that's just over a year. Of those, 7,239 were in Victoria. 13,772 were registered as additional to an employer's usual intake, and 4,613 of those are in Victoria. 7,754 or 35% of all eligible ACE apprentices are located in rural and regional Australia, with more than 2,000 of those in Victoria. Nationally, the largest commencements in the 10 occupations are in carpenters and joiners, plumbers and hairdressers. Payments to eligible employers and apprentices became available from 1 July 2020, 12 months from the commencement of the apprenticeship in an eligible occupation. And as at last week, noting that we've only received claims for about 6 weeks, over 1.51 million has been paid to more than 570 employers, and more than 350 apprentices have received their payment. The Australian Apprentice Wage Subsidy Trial commenced on 1 January 2019 and was expanded on 1 July 2019. It encourages participation in apprenticeships by employers who have not previously engaged an apprentice or exited the system in the 3 years previously. That's the target, and there's quite a focus on small businesses. The OAR subsidy provides employers with a 75% wage subsidy in year 1, 50% in year 2 and 25% in year 3. All the apprenticeships are in rural and regional Australia. They're all at certificate 3 or 4 and they have to be in an occupation identified to be in skill shortage. The initiative was capped at 1,630 places in each of the 2 commencement rounds and included GTOs receiving a 10% proportion of allocated places in eligible states and territories. The only state and territory that's not eligible is the ACT, and that is because there are no rural and regional locations identified in the ACT. At the time of the policy development, which was a year or so ago now, GTOs employed 7.5% of apprentices and trainees in regional Australia. So the proportion was set at 10% to allow GTOs to be able to recruit new host employers into the system. Victoria was allocated 331 places from 1 January and another 331 places from 1 July. The places are fully subscribed in every jurisdiction except the Northern Territory, where there are still GTO places available. I think there's 9 places for GTO still available in the Northern Territory. Payments of those wage subsidies are made 6 monthly in arrears. And as of last week, 45.1 million had been paid to employers nationally and $10.4 million to employers and GTOs in regional Victoria. Trade support loans are the legislated part of the Commonwealth's interaction with the Australian apprenticeship system. And in 2019, there was a number of changes to the trade support loan legislation following some concerns raised around administration and debts and how it worked for apprentices. So there's now an offsetting arrangement in the program, and the secretary of our department can now make determinations around the amount paid that is taken to be called a TSL payment. So that means that it gets put onto the tax office side, and also a payable instalment ratio. So this will reduce recoveries from apprentices, and it also changed and made more flexible the time limit that an apprentice had to report to the department that they had a change of circumstance. So it means that it was easier for apprentices and gave them more time to let us know if there's been a change in their circumstances. And those amendments received royal assent in March of this year. In terms of the take-up, in the last financial year, more than 54,000 apprentices received a trade support loan payment, and we paid around 217 million to those apprentices last year. I popped in this slide around the Australian Apprenticeship Support Network, as they are the Australian Government's core service delivery agents for Australian apprentices. In addition to providing advice to individuals interested in becoming an apprentice and signing up apprentices in Australia and administering our programs, it's important to remember that they're the only organisation approved by the Australian Government to provide advice on and administer our incentives and the trade support loans. As a result of the last tender, you can see on the screen, we have 7 organisations who between them deliver services to all of Australia. The government committed $50 million late last year over 2 years for revitalising TAFE campuses across Australia in partnership with state and territory governments. And you'll recall that at the start I said this is one of the initiatives that I'm responsible for. The initiative aims to improve vocational education infrastructure, ensuring TAFEs are better equipped to deliver training to the standards expected by industry and students. Projects are to support small infrastructure projects, such as building and construction works to expand, upgrade, or refurbish TAFE facilities and buildings purchasing or upgrading specialist training equipment, and investing in technological infrastructure. And this has been important with some changes in training delivery over the last few months. All states and territories submitted proposals, which were assessed by the department for decision by the minister. The minister has approved and allocated the entire $50 million of Commonwealth funding across 2 years, and project agreements signed by relevant state and territory ministers are almost all finalised. These are public documents. They are published on the Federal Financial Relations website. And for those who are interested in looking at those projects and what's been approved at TAFEs across Australia, they're all up there except for the ACT, which we expect will be up there shortly. This is the logo for our new Industry Training Hub initiative. And hopefully as we roll out more of those industry training hubs, people in the sector will become familiar with that logo. The government announced in 2019-20 that we'd invest $50.6 million to trial industry training hubs in 10 regions across Australia. This is another initiative that I'm looking after. The announcement was that 2 would be operational in 2020 and the remaining 8 in 2021. The training hubs, which aren't physical structures, so they are not RTOs and they're not buildings, it's a facilitation role of bringing local stakeholders together. They're targeted at year 11 and 12 students, so people still at school, and assisting them through pathways into local jobs and further education and training. So it's around encouraging young people to build skills and choose occupations in demand in that local region, create better links between schools and industry, reposition VET as a first choice option for those school students, and help eliminate persistent high youth unemployment in regional areas. In the consultations that we did in setting up the model, the one thing that came out was this can't be a one-size-fits-all model. So while each of the hubs will have a full-time career facilitator, the sorts of projects that will come forward from each of those hubs are likely to be different, because they need to be projects that suit the local needs and be developed through local steering committees. That initiative, of course, involves a lot of interaction with schools and in the participating state and territories with school authorities as well as skills authorities. The Burnie Industry Training Hub was launched in March 2020. Of course, COVID started just after that, and our facilitator had to work from home for a while, but nevertheless, he's done outstanding work there. And what we can see from that very first hub is a real consolidation of effort between federal, state and local government. So for instance, our career facilitator in Burnie is located and sits in the local council chambers in Burnie. Given Group Training's involvement in school to work transitions, particularly school-based apprenticeships, there's expected to be a strong role for GTOs in the industry training hub communities. So I am expecting that GTOs in these areas may end up being on steering committees and very much involved in developing some of the projects with those steering committees that come through to me as the delegate to consider. The Townsville hub is expected to open in 2020. We did pause the RFT because COVID hit us as we were in that assessment process, but we are expecting that the Townsville hub will open later in the year, and we're expecting to release the tender for the remaining 8 hubs, which are expected to start early in 2021 in the next couple of months. And that will go up on Oz Tender as all our tenders do. And of course, for the Victorians, one of the hub locations is Shepparton. So that will be one of the ones that's advertised in the next couple of months. The Commonwealth Scholarships for Young Australians operates in the same 10 locations as the training hubs, and I'll show you a map in a moment. It's around a scholarship for around $5,000 a year for a student to undertake vocational education and training. They also receive $3,000 for completing an internship directly related to their study. So that has been implemented. The first round of applications resulted in 48 scholarships being awarded. The second round of scholarships opened on the 24th of April and closed on the 24th of July, and 261 applications were received and are currently being assessed. And then a third round of the scholarships is scheduled to open later this year for preparation for study for semester 1 2021. And you'll get a copy of these slides, but here are the locations of the industry training hubs, pilots, and also the locations of the Commonwealth Scholarship regions for both those initiatives, which are all areas of high youth unemployment. So there's a couple in Queensland, 2 in New South Wales, Shepparton, Port Pirie, Alice Springs, and Wanneroo and Armidale in Western Australia. The last initiative, just talk about briefly, is Foundation Skills for Your Future. This was an initiative that's establishing, it's a new program to support individuals to identify language literacy, numeracy and digital skills deficits, and offers fully subsidised training to support upskilling in those areas. So the department has established a panel of pre-qualified providers to deliver the training nationally. That was through an RFT process. Training is delivered by RTOs on a project basis. The program provides the opportunity for employers to work with a panel member to develop training contextualised to the needs of employees and the employer. And there's quite a lot on our website around that, and also where you can lodge questions. The part of that initiative is also remote community pilots. So another $9.9 million was budgeted to test ways to successfully deliver the same sorts of foundation skills, including digital literacy skills, in 4 remote communities. And so the communities will be in the Northern Territory, Western Australia, South Australia, and Northern Queensland. The pilot's aim to improve the language literacy, numeracy and digital skills of community members across the whole community, and to identify and develop systemic approaches to language literacy, numeracy and digital skills in these remote communities. The pilots will be managed, each pilot will be managed by an Indigenous small or medium enterprise, so they can provide tailored, flexible and locally relevant language literacy, numeracy and digital training and assessment. So there are all the initiatives announced last year, which, you know, as you can see, are well underway and in implementation. And as I said, even through COVID, we've continued to work on those and stand up those initiatives where we can. So the next little part of the presentation is around supporting the recovery from COVID. The government's put significant support in for businesses and students impacted by COVID-19, not just for apprenticeships and traineeships, but to support other vet students as well. So we know that the jobs created as we come out of the COVID-19 pandemic won't be the same as the jobs that were lost, with many job seekers needing to reskill or upskill. All skills ministers have identified apprenticeships and traineeships as a key issue though. The priority is to retain our existing apprentices and trainees, so those skills already developed are not lost to the economy, and also on focusing a forward agenda on stimulating new commencements. An apprenticeship and traineeship working group has been set up by senior policy managers across all jurisdictions. It's chaired by a senior official from the Victorian Department, and I am the Commonwealth representative on that group. And we've been working to identify servicing gaps in apprenticeships and traineeships for displaced apprentices, looking at the out of trade registers and how we can join them up better. We've also been looking at policy and operational responses during COVID-19 and what's working and why, with a view to see whether they can be expanded or replicated. And we're turning our minds now to the recovery phase. There's a huge spirit of cooperation and sharing information with this group, and we're meeting around weekly at the moment. As part of the recovery effort, the government's committed $3.3 billion to additional funding for the vet system. And I'm briefly going to talk about some of the measures. Supporting apprentices and trainees wage subsidy, which does sit in the area next to me and part of my program. So you'll be aware that $2.8 billion has now been committed to supporting apprentices and trainees. It's now around helping not only small but medium businesses employ staff by providing a wage subsidy of 50% of their apprentices or trainees' wage. And where an eligible business is not able to retain an apprentice, the subsidy will be available to a new employer. We also have the Job Trainer Fund. This was announced on the 16th of July to provide access to free or low-cost training places in areas of identified skills needs through the establishment of a new Job Trainer Fund. It includes $500 million from the Australian government, and it's to be matched by states and territories. The JobKeeper payment, private community education training providers may be eligible for that, as well as businesses. And on the 21st of July, the government announced that JobKeeper would be extended from the 27th of September to the 28th of March 2021. There's also a range of other measures around for business, including boosting cash flow for employers, temporary relief of financial distress, increasing the instant asset write-off, and backing business investment. The Supporting Apprentices and Trainees measure was announced on the 12th of March as part of the economic stimulus package. The measure covered 9 months' wages from 1 January 2020 to 30 September 2020 to assist small businesses retain their existing apprentices and trainees. So the measure included a 50% wage subsidy based on actual wages, so very different to our Australian Apprentice Wage Subsidy trial, paid to a maximum of $7,000 per quarter. The employer had to be a small business with fewer than 20 employees. That's the ABS definition of business size. And for GTOs, a small host. The apprentice or trainee must have been in training on the 1st of March. Many have pointed out to me that that was a Sunday, and I can advise people on the line that that was quite a deliberate decision and an integrity measure from government. So backdated and starting on the 1st of March. Payments are made 3 monthly in arrears, noting that in the main APE program that this sits in, most of our payments are 6 monthly in arrears or even 12 monthly in arrears. All Certificate 2 and above apprenticeships and traineeships are eligible. There's no requirement for an apprenticeship or traineeship to be on a skills need list in a particular postcode, in a particular industry. So it's open to all Certificate 2 and above apprenticeships. And interestingly, the wage subsidy can be claimed in addition to the standard incentives and additional incentives that already sit in the program. So what we're seeing now and hearing from our ASM providers is that apprentices who started in the first part of this year, which is the biggest intake of apprentices and trainees, particularly school leavers, are now coming through with their claims for their standard commencement incentive, their rural and regional incentive, and all those things that you can claim at the 6 month point. The GTOs, consistent with the wage subsidy trial we already have, there's a requirement to pass the wage subsidy to the host employer. It's important to remember that the main incentives in our program, which are now, we've got the claims coming in for apprentices started this year, do not need to be passed to the host under our guidelines. On the 22nd of April, industry was advised of some changes that had been made to the GTO component as a result of the subsequent JobKeeper announcement. Following the announcement of JobKeeper, concerns were raised that apprentices and trainees in host businesses receiving JobKeeper may be disadvantaged if they are employed through a GTO. To address this, the value of supporting apprentices and trainees' wage subsidy was increased to $1,500 per fortnight for apprentices and trainees employed by a GTO where the host employer of any size was receiving JobKeeper payment and retains their apprentice. There were no changes to the requirements of the 1st of March, and in fact, JobKeeper had the same eligibility date. Like the rest of the program, the GTO cannot be in receipt of JobKeeper and claim this money. I think it's important for me to say that in the lead up to implementation and release of the guidelines for those new measures, we did quite a lot of consultation with GTOs, and we had 75 pages of questions and answers drafted up, including a whole range of diagrams with different scenarios of if a person with a host on this day moved to a host of this size on this day, when was returned to the GTO and then left the GTO. All the different scenarios that GTOs came forward with to the department were really helpful in us being able to draft up quite a comprehensive document that could be used by the ASINs and GTOs themselves to have a look at how the actual dates would work. And so I do thank anybody on the line that was part of that process. As part of Job Trainer, an extension and expansion of our measure was announced on 16th of July, and this applies to small and medium businesses. The definition of medium, again, the ABS definition, of less than 200 employees in training on 1 July 2020. And like our small business definition, this is not FTE and things, it's how many employees. It doesn't matter whether they're casuals, part-time or full-time people. An additional $1.5 billion was made available to extend the measure by 6 months to 31 March 2021, bringing the total for the whole measure to $2.8 billion. The extension to medium businesses means that overall, the measures are expected to support around 90,000 businesses, employing around 180,000 apprentices. For GTOs, the size of the business is based on the host employer's size, and the subsidy must be passed directly to the host employer. The subsidy rate is unchanged. It's 50% of actual wages up to the maximum $7,000 per quarter. And the measure will continue to be delivered by our ASINs with the administrative arrangements the same as the existing measure, payments made quarterly in arrears based on wages evidence. The measure also includes a wage subsidy for a business who re-engages a displaced apprentice or trainee, and it's opened up to displaced from a medium business if the apprentice or trainee was there on the 1st of July. And for all our apprenticeship and traineeship incentives, including the main program and these new measures, it's always based around what the apprentice or trainee was doing, so where they were on a particular date. The program guidelines are being drafted at the moment to reflect the extension, and my team is drafting those guidelines. I expect they'll be available around mid-September. We don't have a date yet. Claims for the new measure, of course, don't come in until October because we aren't changing the 3-monthly claim period. But we will certainly put out an announcement when those guidelines become available. The ASINs, of course, as our core service provider, will receive training on the extended measure and be provided with Q&As and scenarios. I think it is important to remember that the measure does sit within our existing program. And part of the reason for that is that the program already has a service delivery network, it has an IT system, it has a set of guidelines that are well known by providers that just needed adding to. And it also has a comprehensive compliance strategy that sits around the program that's in that other division of the department. I am aware that there is some additional administrative work for employers and also for GTOs who are claiming the wage assistance. But we do need, to have quite comprehensive administrative arrangements in place to make sure that we have payment integrity. And I think the main issue that we've heard is that not so much from GTOs, but for some employers, it has been difficult to provide the wage evidence that's in a format that the ASINs are able to make payments on. So how are we going? Since the 2nd of April, when the meter opened to applications, and noting that on the very first day we opened to applications, we started to make payments. 484 million, so nearly $500 million has been paid to small employers and to GTOs. 422.4 million for trade apprenticeships, 40.9 for non-trade apprenticeships and traineeships. Around 88,300 Australian apprentices have attracted the wage subsidy for their employer, and 50,700 small businesses, 37% of those in regional and remote Australia. In terms of GTOs, and you'll get these on the slides, I've said to Gary I'm happy for the slides to come out. 91 GTOs have received payments under the measure. 74 of those have apprentices located in regional and remote Australia. And as at the 13th of August, 31.56 million had been paid for GTOs. The main sorts of occupations that GTOs, apprentices are in that are receiving it, there's around 68 different occupations: bricklayers, carpenters and joiners, electricians, auto, plumbing, fabrication, engineering, trades workers and clerks. So they're the base trade occupations, and starting to get into some traineeships as well. I can see I'm running out of time, so I might skip through some of these pretty quickly. But you'll also be aware that an infection control training fund has been announced. So all skills ministers came together to form an emergency subcommittee to develop new skill sets to meet the training needs emerging from COVID-19. So the current skill sets include infection control skills for retail, for transport and logistics, for food handling, and some cross-sector infection control sets. Now we are expecting the states, sorry, I'm reading my notes here and skipping a few things. Training staff in infection control designed to support businesses to reopen safely. And the states and territories have now entered into contracts with RTOs to deliver the subsidised training. The decisions on who to deliver the training and which specific training to be supported through the courses is a matter for states and territories because they're probably best placed to understand their local needs. So now a few words on future directions. So job trainer, I spoke about that before. So the $1.5 billion supporting apprentices and trainees measure is part of this. But in addition to that is the $500 million from the Commonwealth to be matched by states for the new job trainer fund. The fund is to deliver free or low-cost training in areas of skills need for job seekers and school leavers, providing up to 340,700 training places, depending on the mix of full and short courses funded by states and territories. And I'm advised that the first training places are expected to be delivered from September. So that's coming up very soon. Currently, under the National Agreement for Skills and Workforce Development, the Commonwealth provides states and territories with over $1.5 billion annually in untied funding for VET delivery. The expert review into VET highlighted the need for longer-term reform of the VET sector. On the 5th of June, the Productivity Commission released its interim report on the effectiveness of the NASWAD following a submission process. And I'm aware that many of the participants today were part of that submission process. In July, a heads of agreement was developed and all jurisdictions have signed the heads of agreement for skills reform. The heads of agreement sets out immediate reforms to improve the vet sector and an approach and priorities for developing a new skills agreement to replace the NASWAD. The priorities in the heads of agreement are aimed at ensuring the vet system is delivering for students and employers and equipping Australians with the skills they need for emerging jobs. The heads of agreement is also a public document. It is available up on the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet website. Under the heads of agreement, all parties will be working collaboratively on complex longer-term issues and reflecting these in the new National Skills Agreement. The head of agreement builds on the draft vet reform roadmap commissioned by the former Council of Australian Governments. The new National Skills Agreement will be finalised by August 2021 with a transition period commencing from 1 January 22 or when it's signed by the Commonwealth and one other party, and will cover the 5-year period to 2026-27. So if participants haven't yet looked at that, I would urge you to have a look at that because it does spell out some of the reform map going forward. I had a look yesterday. It is quite easy to find on the Prime Minister and Cabinet website. I've got a slide here on mutual recognition of occupational licensing. So for participants, this is something that I look after, part of the Commonwealth's Mutual Recognition Act of 1992, the part that deals with mutual recognition of occupational licensing. And while it's not about apprenticeships directly, it does have a strong link to industry and employer needs. For skills, having consistency in the qualifications that support the licensing requirements for occupations can assist mutual recognition when states and territories are looking at licensing equivalents. On the 15th of June, the Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister and Cabinet, the Honourable Ben Morton MP, announced the government's deregulation task force is focusing on improving occupational mobility. And then on the 17th of August, just last week, the Treasurer announced that the Council of Federal Financial Relations are going to prioritise the implementation of a uniform scheme to support widespread mobility via automatic mutual recognition to take effect from 1 January 2021, subject to passage of legislation. So this is a very ambitious agenda going forward. And I have a staff member outposted to that area dealing with that. So just before I finish up, and I won't read through these slides, but I think we need to, I want to draw participants' attention to two major enabling reforms that have been recently announced that all of us working in the vet sector need to be cognisant about and work on together. So the first is the new National Agreement on Closing the Gap. The department has a number of deliverables under this. And if you have a look at the targets, you know, there's targets about year 12, tertiary education targets, a youth target, and you can see that that's age 15 to 24, so the major cohort of apprentices and trainees, and also an employment target. So I do draw your attention to this particular announcement. It is something that as a government officer we will be taking into account in our future policy development. And then also to the review of disability standards for education 2005. So you're aware that there is a Royal Commission disability on at the moment. But sitting underneath that, we are setting up a consultation process. It's open till the 25th of September. I'm one of the vet people that's involved in this, and we really do need to have a look at all the standards that sit in the education sector that relate to disability. as we move forward with reform. So on the slide there is actually the website where you can make a submission to that review of the disability standards, which will go right through from childcare, schools, vet and higher education. So I think I'll finish up there, Gary, because I've gone 5 minutes over time.
Thanks, Linda. That's great. We know it's a really tough gig talking to a screen for an hour, but that was a wonderful presentation. You've given us a comprehensive overview of everything there, which is great. I know we're a couple of minutes over, but I haven't had any questions listed in the chat room. But if anyone's got a burning question they need to ask now, we'll take that. But if not, we'd just like to thank you for all your time and effort.
For people to email questions directly to me. So my email address is linda.white@dese.gov.au. So you can see the name of the department on the front screen, so DESE. Or as Gary and I talked at the beginning, if you email questions through to Gary and the team, he can forward them on to me. So I'm more than happy to take questions, and I'm also more than happy if people want to pick up a phone and call me, of course. I take lots of calls from industry stakeholders, and it's probably the highlight of the day, I'd have to say. So happy Tuesday, and safe travels, particularly for all you people in Victoria who I can see Gary's working from home on the screen.
No, thanks, Linda. Thanks for your best wishes and your time today. That was great.